Well, hi everyone, Lisa Tamati here at Pushing the Limits. Once again, thank you so much for your loyalty and coming back to the show every week. I really, really appreciate it. I'm super, super excited. I've been studying all yesterday, and I've got one of the world's leading experts in HIIT science and exercise physiology on the show today, Dr. Paul Laursen. So thank you very much, Dr. Paul, for being on the show. Welcome to the Pushing the Limits.
Oh, thank you for having me, Lisa. It's an honor to be here.
It's so exciting. Dr. Paul's sitting in Canada, but he also knows New Zealand very well because he was the head of exercise physiology over here. Is that right, Paul? Yeah. And you were here for 2 Olympic cycles, training our Olympic athletes.
That's right. Yeah, I was there for the the London and the Rio Olympic cycles. And I was leading the physiology team at that point in time. So,
oh wow,
just great times, awesome memories. Based at the Millennium Institute on the North Shore in Auckland, and words have a hard time kind of describing just like what a great time in life that was for my whole family and stuff. But so much learning along the way as well that really forms where I'm at today with HIIT science and some of the other stuff that we'll talk about.
Yeah, because you're really at the cutting edge you yourself are a very experienced Ironman triathlete. So you have experience actually as an athlete, as well as being, a professor in exercise physiology and having all this experience with Olympic athletes. That must, it's an incredible combination. Can you drop a few names of people that you perhaps work with in Auckland? That'd be interesting to know.
Well, I mean, I don't know if I can really name drop too much. Like I think the cool thing about being a physiologist is that you sit in the background and you work with people and you work with all the top coaches and the top athletes, but you really just need to, you just kind of be the quiet person in the back. And I mean, anyone in that, you can, just about anyone in that those 2 Olympic cycles, you touch their programs either through the coaches or the support staff. It's a big, and again, I'm just one
part of
small cog in the wheel of the high performance system. So it's just, and it's all about team lots of big names, but I'm not big on dropping them.
Fair enough. So Dr. Paul, today I want to go into some of your areas of specialty. So a lot of my audience, not all of them, but a lot of my audience are runners, and many of them are ultra marathon runners. And I'd like to, we're going to get into the science of HIIT training, so high intensity interval training for those listening, and how this applies in maybe something in the sport like marathon running or long distance running, and what sort of benefits we can gain from it. So can you tell us a little bit about that? And then I would like to go later on to heart rate variability and all of those sort of good things as well. But let's start with HIIT training. So you've written the book on HIIT training. What is the title? The Science and Application of HIIT Training. Can you tell us a little bit about why is HIIT training so important across so many sports?
Yeah, it's super important, and when you look at a sport like ultra distance running, you would think it maybe almost has no place, but in fact, your listeners can get massive gains by implementing such type of training in their programming. And let's maybe ask the question, why would someone who's doing a 100K ultra possibly benefit from HIIT? And I guess they're really, I mean, we should also define what HIIT is. Like, high intensity interval training specifically is defined as repeating bouts of high intensity exercise that are performed above your threshold. So that threshold kind of pace, you've got to be above that by default for it to be called HIIT. So not even moderate intensity sustained efforts. We're actually talking like above your threshold. In other words, you can't sustain the exercise for too long before you have to stop and take a break. If you were to hold the exercise intensity up there, you would, you'd ultimately fatigue. So if you're doing this repeatedly, you're actually, you're eliciting some effects in your physiology that you're not going to be getting from just your steady state exercise, your long distance training. And some of these key ones are recruitment of your fast twitch muscle fibers. So you get to, you get to build on those fast twitch muscle fibers. You have to use those by default to perform such exercise. And that creates the adaptations that you want, especially as an ultra distance runner. You want to create those faster twitch muscle fibers, make them more slow twitch like, or fatigue resistant and oxidative. And you do that by, if the stimulus is repeated, you wind up actually doing that. So, and then the second one relates, so that's the peripheral component. The second component really relates to the central component. And I'm pointing to when I'm saying central component, I'm really pointing to my heart, my cardiac apparatus. So the ventricles of the heart wind up stretching out further, filling up further, and by default they actually push more blood out. So your stroke volume winds up increasing, your cardiac output winds up increasing. So you get that more so, the ventricular stretch, more so than if you were just going to do a steady state long exercise. So by supplementing HIIT exercise into an ultra distance program, not all, but just intermittently in the week, your listeners will get a real good bang for their buck.
Yeah. No, I as a young athlete, before I knew what the hell I was doing at all, I used to do just miles and miles of slow long distance running. I had no speed, genetically speaking. I wasn't great, didn't have a great VO2 max or anything like that. And so for years, especially in ultra distance, it was very much a sort of a pioneering time, if you like, back 20 something years ago, and we had no idea of anything, or at least not in my circles. I'd just go out and just run long and slow, because that's what we were going to be doing in the race, long and slow. And of course, I could get to the finish line of those races, but it wasn't the most efficient style of training, as I now know. But it took me a bit of a stretch to get my head around why, if I'm like all about the slow twitch fibers, I'm all about the endurance, what possible benefit can I do by recruiting my fast twitch fibers? And I'm sure I've got very few left. I don't know if you can lose them all when you do endurance training. So how do the fast twitch fibers actually benefit you later in a longer race, for example? Why is it not just all about the slow twitch fibers? I get the cardio output side of things. You're going to be fitter, at a higher VO2 max and so on. But from the slow twitch fibers, aren't they the most important thing for an endurance runner?
Yeah, they would definitely be the most important thing. However, the more fast of the larger motor units, it's a bit of a continuum. It's hard to say whether one is actually fast versus slow. So the key thing is actually the like you want to be able to recruit these larger motor units, like the fast twitch fibers. And when you do, they're more powerful, right? They're actually bigger, and these bigger and more powerful motor units, when they're contracting, they're going to be able to propel you a lot faster than your slower ones. So your pace will be able to be increased. Your pace on the hills will be a lot better. You just feel a lot more energy ultimately.
So you'll be able to do, sustain a higher pace even over the longer distances. Now, there are different types of HIIT training. You talk about the 5 HIIT training weapons, I think you call them.
Right.
Let's look at that, because for the average person, HIIT training just means perhaps sprinting and then backing off and sprinting again. What are some of the variables and some of the different types of HIIT training that we can do?
Yep. So the 2 key variables and the most influential ones are the intensity of the work bout and the duration of the work bout. Those are the 2 key ones, right? And then we can also look at the recovery interval as well, the intensity and the duration of the recovery interval. But let's just focus on, if we break the intensities up, the first one we usually start with is our long interval. And this would be just above just at, your VO2 max exercise intensity, if you know where that might be, right? So that might be sitting on a, repeated 1K efforts on the track would be typically, if you're going to do, 6 of those, that's typically around your VO2 max and exercise intensity. Or your sort of your 1,500 meter to 3,000 meter run pace on the track, all out kind of thing. So, but yeah, so you're kind of repeating those for 2 to 5 minutes, repeated bouts of that for 2 to 5 minutes at that pace, and that's typically that's considered your a long interval, and that's the first of the 5 weapons that you referred to. The second weapon is the short interval. The short interval are done at just a marginally higher exercise intensity than the long interval, and these might be on the track, might be like, 100 or 200 or 300 meter repeats, something like that, with usually equivalent rest intervals as recovery too. So done a little bit harder, not much, just a little bit more harder than the long interval, with equivalent short rests. So these are typically in the 10-second to 60-second range of duration, and 10 seconds to 60-second range of recovery. So there's your long interval, there's your short interval, and then the other 3. So the next one is you referred to it. Do I sprint all out? Well, the next 2 are all out maximal sprints. Tabata-like intervals for the sprint interval training. Those are long sprints, or really short and sharp all out short sprints for repeated sprint interval training. So, repeated sprint training, RST. And then the last one is not used too much in the ultra distance context, I would think, but it's game-based interval training. So there's a good team sport base of people in New Zealand with the rugby and the football and all those various different sports. And if you're in the team sports, you're definitely using game-based interval training. They're like you're actually putting the ball into play as you do an interval. That's a team sport.
And making it a bit more fun and very short, sort of sharp bursts of activity.
Exactly. And the coach will actually do that, and they'll kind of almost trick their players into getting the work done. So they create fun, but it's also very sports specific too. So you can see why it's so successful in the team sport context.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said trick them into it, because when I hear HIIT training, I hear, oh no, like personally, when I have to go, I've got a HIIT session on today. It's like, oh no, here we go. How do you overcome that sort of a feeling of like, because should you be going to the point of absolute exhaustion and throwing up in the bucket somewhere during these sessions, or is that going too far? And is another question too, is the HIIT training only in relation to running, like cardiovascular or a bike, or can you do, say, a HIIT Tabata session and that counts as a HIIT training session, so it can be weights related, or is it only sort of cycling and running?
Sure. So let's start with your first question there, which was basically around the whole, do you have to go to the well? Does it have to be no pain, no gain? And that is a really important question that you asked, Lisa, because it's absolutely not. So you shouldn't. HIIT training was never originally designed for that. It should not be no pain, no gain. Like that's not, you've taken it to where it's too painful, like you've taken it too far, and it's ultimately not very effective for almost like a longevity type sort of thing. So the key thing that we find with training, those who are most successful in training are those who back up session after session. Consistency of training is key. And if you're going to the well and you're killing yourself and you're not able to perform the next day because you trained too hard in a HIIT session or whatever, you're slowing down the progression compared to what you could actually achieve had you gone just a little bit back and then repeated some sort of a session the next day. So that's the first question. It's not about no pain, no gain. It's not about going to the well. Always leave a session like you could have done one more as the first rule. Remind me of your second question.
The second question was, is it only cardio? So is HIIT training only in relation to, say, cycling and running? Is your cardio, activities?
Yeah, as we like to say.
Also Tabata or CrossFit, is those sort of things counted as HIIT training?
Yeah, bit of a debatable one. So from a purist standpoint, it's typically we're talking about a mode of exercise like cycling, running, rowing, swimming, whole body type exercise. However, there's lots of ways to skin the cat, as we love to say. And, there's a lot, we see this being done throughout team sports and exercise, the fitness industries, CrossFit, etc. And there's certainly loads of different ways to kind of do that. So I guess it's kind of yes and kind of no on that question. It just really depends what camp that you're sitting in.
Yeah, how purist you are on the.
Yeah, and also it also depends probably on what you're trying to. So if you're a time crunched individual that has to sit in an office and work most of the day, you might like a CrossFit type exercise where it's hitting lots of different things, like circuit training. That might be all you can kind of get in the day, and that might be really practical to your context. So super. If we're going to take the professional athlete, we don't recommend it, because in the professional athlete context, typically we can just be a little bit more precise with the training, and we don't have to be supersetting everything and going back and forth. That will differ across beliefs and strategies of different conditioners. That's just what Martin and I kind of feel with what it is that we do.
So it's very specific to the sport art that you're doing. So you would train a soccer player different than you would train an ultra marathon runner or an Ironman triathlete. What are some of the typical trainings? I mean, not really typical training sessions, probably a hard one to answer, but if you had an athlete coming to you, they're doing a 100K event, what type of interval trainings would you prescribe to them as a typical part of their week?
Yeah, so if I was training an ultra runner, I'd train them very similar to a marathoner, and I would train them. They would have lots of elements of the long, slow distance type training in it. In terms of the HIIT sessions, there would likely be a short interval session in there, so like 30 on, 30 off. Set in certain sets of 30 on, 30 off. Say 7 30 on, 30 off, and then followed by 5 minutes easy, and then repeat that. So you're actually eliciting a VO2 response, and you're again recruiting those fast twitch muscle fibers. I might have a long interval in there, a few long intervals at a couple different moments in the training program. I would be implementing hill training in there most definitely, because so many ultras actually have a hill requirement. Plus that would be kind of there's a strength endurance element that we want in there, both that a benefit that you get both on the uphill climbing as well as the downhill. So I think those would be the key elements, in addition to some moderate intensity pace work and lots of long distance work in there.
Yeah, and that's sort of what we adhere to generally. So I want to ask you, what are the dangers? Like I've just selfishly asking for personal reasons now. I've done obviously, bloody long time of doing stupid amount of running. And in the beginning, just doing huge mileage. And now I'm totally not into huge mileage. I'm into more the, varying everything up, and the 5 pillars we call them. So, your strength training, your mobility, your run sessions of varying types, your nutrition and your mental game as well. But I've run into problems with burnout and adrenal exhaustion and the HPA axis, in the gutter, basically. Cortisol, I'm at a stage now where the cortisol is just not producing at all. It's just like all day. Have And I think I've done too many, long stuff and the HIIT stuff as well. Is there a danger in doing too much overtraining, and can you come back from that? It's a very complicated question.
Yes and yes.
Is there a way back for me from the
Of course. Yeah, I think the body always wants to get back and heal itself and return to homeostasis and balance, right? And I think you know the answer to the first question. You certainly can burn out doing too much HIIT, and that is so. You may have seen the article that Phil Maftone and I wrote on the unhealthy athlete, and that's really around the whole burnout thing with
fit but unhealthy.
Unhealthy, yeah. So it's made its rounds around the world, and yeah, that's one of the ones that. Yeah, I even saw that a lot in the high performance sport context, where there was just too much intensity in certain programs, and we do see this burnout that actually occurs. And it really it just requires a period of rest, and requires well, let me back up a bit and just say that there's stress comes in many different forms, and it's often not just the high intensity interval training that's contributing to that. A lot of times it's a bunch of different stressors that are coming into play and creating a perfect storm ultimately. So we've got, nutrition can be a stress in itself if it's inappropriate for the individual. A lack of sleep is a huge stressor. The psychosocial stresses that we all experience through our human existence going through life. So all of these things create, and then add exercise into that as well. If any of those are creating too much of a stress overall, it affects what you mentioned, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the HPA axis, which is basically our integrator in the brain between the nervous system and the endocrine system. And it's there to help protect us, at least it was, and now it can sabotage us, right? And create too many these stress hormones. And then also we can see we can reach the point where it's almost done a little bit too much, and we're not able to return to create the hormonal profile that we need to have control our moods and these sorts of things, right? But at the end of the day, it requires rest and recovery. One of the little tricks that I like to use, sometimes when that happens, is floating. And I'm not sure if floating is taken off in New Zealand. It has around the world.
Flotation tanks.
Flotation tanks, isolation tanks is a great means of resetting and returning the body to homeostasis. It's not like you're going to get there on one single float, but it's like a series of floats can reset the sleep, and then the body can kind of come back into rhythm. You really need to get back into that circadian rhythm again and getting stress under control.
Yeah. So what you're saying, and something that we talk about a lot in our coaching, is you got a bucket of stress, and if you're sticking in mental stress, work stress, kid stress, whatever, wrong foods, and then your bucket starts to get full, and then you start putting in training loads that, and when you're not a professional athlete, you're just a busy executive or something with 3 kids, then you're going to overfill the bucket, and then you're going to tip over. And that's when these sorts of things can start to happen. And on that point, we could get on to the heart rate variability in a moment. But yeah, it is quite a struggle. What we're seeing a lot of with the people that we're coaching is we coach a lot of, so not elite athletes as much as probably 80% women in their 30s, 40s, and 50s who are having hormonal changes as well as going through, but trying to still stay at the top end of their game, wherever they're at. And that can be quite a tricky tightrope walk as well. Have you got any experience or any advice for say, women approaching those, changes, menopausal years, perimenopause, in regards to their training, that can help them get through that period, if you like?
I don't have any great advice. That's but doesn't really add on what I just kind of mentioned. Like you've got to, so those changes are going to be happening. That's a natural physiological occurrence. Can't get away from that. And your management of those issues is going to relate to your own context. And you're going to do the best you can. But some of these strategies, such as really checking in with your diet, potentially, like there's a lot of individuals that they think they've got the diet right, but maybe it could actually be better. So if you've got leaky gut issues, that's a real telltale sign that something's a little bit off. So get some help with that, because that could be, two things that are kind of going awry in the diet or in the stressors. And then, things like meditation, that's so much easier to say, but harder to do. But if people can find a meditation practice that helps, that is another way that you can kind of reset the HPA axis. Almost forced meditation is this float tank kind of situation, because a lot of people can't they can't even imagine getting into one of these isolation tanks, because they think they're just so claustrophobic and anxious about it. And that is again a telltale sign that there could be an issue there, right? If you can't do that, like that's another, that anxiety might be elevated, stress might be elevated in that individual too.
Yeah.
So, and where do you start with this? I don't know. You just have to take one step at a time, fix one little thing, make one step towards becoming, lowering that stress in your life.
Yeah, I think that's totally.
I answered the question too well there, because there's never a blanket solution for every individual. And look, in my experience, the menopause process is quite variable. It's weird on one morning, and then it's fine the next moment, and then it's back. So, I don't know.
And being kind to yourself would probably be a good general rule, and I'm not expecting the earth all the time of yourself. But yeah, I think what the message, and I'm a very big proponent of meditation, of deep breathing exercises, and things like the Wim Hof method, all of those sort of areas that can help sort of stimulate that parasympathetic nervous system and calm the body down, so that it is not completely in fight or flight all the time. Having said that, it's very hard.
Can I add one other big one? And it's, we're both using it right now as we speak, and so is the listener, because they're listening to us likely on some sort of technology device. But technology is a real big elephant in the room too. That's we haven't had that in the past.
No.
And that is another thing that really affects our stress levels, is being glued to our phones and to our computers and our iPads and all these various different things. And it's become integrated in part of our life, but that's another big factor that can really make a difference. And that's probably why ultras are so appealing to people, because they'll leave their phone and leave a little bit of technology behind. When they go, they can just get away from it for a certain amount of time. And if you're feeling that way, like I know I do, so you probably,
definitely.
This is probably the same. But, there's a little bit of magic that's probably within that whole, issue that we kind of need to appreciate. So last year I went on a big paddle trip with the family, and it was in a place in British Columbia where there's no technology, and it's like it was called the Balron Lakes. It's a series of 11 lakes, and you're portaging through it, and there's no point in taking any technology, because there's nothing out there. So you're living and you're camping for that many days, and I can't tell you how incredible that was, and the whole reset of the HPA axis for me. I just felt like it's back to nature and stuff, and so doing more ultras.
But that single focus
is another big thing. Yeah,
I think that's something that I miss, because I've stopped doing ultra marathons the last 3 years. I had a mum who got sick, and I had to drop everything and rehabilitate her, and I miss that singularity of thought, and that those hours of clearing the mind every day. And that's something that really is missing, especially when you're like yourself, running businesses and fully always high performance everything. and it can really be a load on the whole body that I think is actually worse than the load of ultra running. If I could go back to the simple days when all I had to worry about was the finish line or getting to the finish line, it was a whole lot simpler than all the stuff that we have typically in our life, in our crazy world now, have coming at us. On that point, I wanted to start talking just briefly about HRV.
Sure.
Heart rate variability, and how you use this to judge what is it for starters, because a lot of people still haven't really heard what heart rate variability is and how it works and how they can use it in their training. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So heart rate variability is what the word kind of describes. So it's the variation of the heartbeat. And a lot of times when we just start out and we just think of heart rate in itself, we think of it more or less like a clock or like a metronome, and it just goes tick tock, tick tock. If you're to listen to your heart, that's what you would think. But in actual fact, there's a lot of variation that's going on beat to beat. So it's actually going tick tock, tick tock, tick tock. And that variation, what scientists have discovered is that variation in those beats actually means something. When it's more like the clock or the metronome and it's right on time, you're using what's called your sympathetic system or your fight or flight. Okay, so your stress would be high.
Yep.
And when it's really a lot more variable, going all over the place, well, that's more associated with the parasympathetic system, the rest and digest system, being relaxed and recovered, like when you're sleeping. So what's wound up happening now is we've gotten very innovative in our means of being able to get a hold of this heart rate variability, and that's why people are hearing a lot more about this. So I certainly measure this in my own athletes, and because they can do it so simply now. And this was we had the honor of being a part of this innovation and development and validation of it at the AUT lab. Wow. In Auckland, in Millennium, and we verified this HRV for Training app, and the HRV for Training app actually uses the iPhone camera. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but basically you can measure your heart rate variability just using like the phone, like phone camera. So you can actually use the camera lens, and you can actually like get a measure of your heart rate variability just on your iPhone like that.
Oh.
So this was Marco Altini of HRV for Training, and we verified this in AUT lab with against ECG, so standard ECG. He uses various different, artificial intelligent means of just establishing the HRV, and it's even better than using a polar chest strap, we discovered.
That's incredible. So HRV training, so people can get that in the App Store and grab that?
Yeah, get it for, yeah. And there's also a coaching version too. So I use the coaching version. I have all my athletes are on this, and you can just see how easy this is. So right or wrong, I do sleep with my iPhone beside my bed, but I wake up in the morning. Yeah. The very first thing I'll do is I'll take this measurement of the HRV, and that just automatically logs onto the HRV for Training, server, and then your coach or yourself can actually look at that, and you can actually get your score. And you don't actually look at what a single measure. You don't usually look at like a single measure, but you're looking at the trend in that measure over time, and that's very useful, especially if you're under a heavy training load or stresses are getting in the way. So all the stress stuff that we were talking about before, it can be quantified using the HRV for Training, or at least it's with one marker, right? So very highly useful.
That's a really exciting. I mean, we use a very simple analog version, which is like a wellness check sheet that sort of gives people a rating of 1 to 10 on their hydration, their sleep, their niggles, their stress levels, all that sort of thing. But this is a much simpler way to just get that one figure. But there is a little bit of, it isn't just saying, oh, today it's dropped, therefore I'm not healthy or something's going on. You do have to look at the trend lines and not read in too much into any single reading, isn't it? So when you're seeing over 3 or 4 days that there's something going on, that's when you get more, maybe it's time to back off and have a bit of a recovery period before you go on to your next session. So that's definitely a super exciting app. I'll be downloading that today. Everybody go and grab that. It's tip of the week, that one. So, and this is just something that's very simple that we can really measure if we're going into overtraining or getting sick or anything that's going on inside the body. It's a very quick way of giving us that measurement. So that's super exciting. Now, I wanted to go on to your flow bottle, but you have designed the flow bottle, which is like a slushy. And I said to Dr. Paul before I got on the recording, I wish I'd had that in Death Valley or in the Sahara when I was running. So how does this work, and why is so thermoregulation is another area that you're an expert in? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So this has a cool story that again goes back to New Zealand. And so when I first arrived in New Zealand, I was coming from Australia. I just done my Ph.D. and been a professor over in Australia, working a lot with the Australian Institute of Sport. And there were a couple of hot games that we were preparing for. I think one was Atlanta, another one was Athens, and and so pre-cooling was one of my areas that I did a lot of work on. So just figuring out how we could cool the body beforehand. And one of the first things that I guess the leaders at HBSNZ said when I first arrived is, do something innovative, Paul, and figure out, be creative and make us something that we, our athletes can kind of use to win on the world stage. So put my head on and got to work. And I came up with this because I knew the power of ice slushy to cool us. From my work in Australia, I said, wow, wouldn't it be cool if we could actually use ice slushy when we're exercising? I said, oh, perfect, easy. We'll just get a water bottle and we'll put ice slushy in it. But there were no water bottles at the time that would allow for the expulsion of ice slushy when you were exercising. So that's when we went to the there's this innovation project with the engineers at the University of Canterbury down in Christchurch. So we got into their program, they took it on, and a bunch of fourth year engineering students made the flow bottle, which is basically, they figured out, they did all these various different experiments to figure out how they were going to design a bottle to be able to cause for the ice slushy to kind of get out of that, keep it cold. And they came up with a prototype bottle. They did an amazing job. And then a company by the name of Procreate, so Graham Brewster, his company out of Auckland, North Shore, he and his team made a beautiful, what I believe is a beautiful design of a silicone version of this one. So, silicone from your oven mitts and those sorts of things.
Yeah.
But kind of keeps it like it's solid, but it's still like you can kind of push it to allow for that slushy to come out.
Yeah.
And they made a beautiful design in terms of the nozzle, and now we have the flow bottle. So it's being used by a number of different countries in the Olympics. You might have heard that the Tokyo Games is just going to be absolutely ridiculous in terms of the heat. So it's already been used in the test event. We've seen some great photos. New Zealand team has been using that. So and that's been just absolutely awesome.
Yeah.
So it's pretty exciting. So it's available for anyone to use, and especially your listeners, most who will be in New Zealand, can access that pretty easily through the Flow Bottle website and actually hitting up Procreate for some bottles.
Oh, I've got to get one. So what is the website there? So this is tip number 2 for today's show. Where do we get our flow bottle from? What was the?
It's FLOE bottle, so flow bottle. So and flow FLOE is like a play on words with like an ice flow, which is, but yeah, like an ice flow, like an iceberg and stuff, and they're called like the little pieces that are breaking off and hanging out there in the Arctic, the flows. So it's a flow bottle.
It's something that will be very beneficial in some of these hot races, especially hot long running races. How does ice? This is the last thing before we wrap up today, because I'm aware of your time. how does, when you put ice in your tummy, doesn't it, I've always heard it's not good, you know, and it will stop digestion and cause trouble. Is that true, or what's the go there?
No, it certainly wouldn't be due to the cool temperatures, and that can only kind of benefit. So we should actually leave with being very clear on the benefits and why ice slushy actually works from a cooling standpoint. So it works for a couple different reasons. First of all, it's almost like reverse of the sweating process. So when we sweat and our sweat is actually evaporated on our skins, it's the process of the evaporation, the actual state change from a liquid to a gas that elicits that energy release, heat energy. So again, that's a very important physics kind of principle that allows us to survive in that sweating. But when you can't evaporate your sweat enough, like such as in places like Tokyo or Hawaii,
humidity and
humidity, what are you going to do? Well, you can't really do too much about it, but you can. A little trick, of course, is to work the opposite phase change, and you're actually going from the same thing happens, except it happens on you when it's going from a solid to a liquid. So you're putting solid ice into your system, and in order to melt that ice, the ice has to take heat energy away from your body.
Wow.
And it does that in the places that matter as well. And when you're ingesting it, it's cooling your neck and the carotid vessels that are going back up to your brain. And same with your central core. So you're getting it in just the right places that you need it. And yeah, I mean, all the science is on the website if people are interested.
Yeah.
And including all the research papers. It's well documented within the studies. Again, that's why I invented this thing, because we did 8 years of research in a laboratory to kind of uncover a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
And yeah, it works like a hot damn.
Well, because one of the things that we did say in Death Valley, or whether it was extreme temperatures, was always having little ice bags that we had on our wrists and up here, a thing around here. But yeah, nobody had one of those back then. So definitely something to watch out for. Now, Dr. Paul, you have a course, HIIT training course for any other, sports and conditioning coaches out there who want to really dive deep into the top end science. Tell us a little bit about that course and about the book that goes along with that, and what you're doing now and how people can reach out to you.
Yeah, for sure. So my main work is with HIIT science. So it's HIIT, which is HIIT science.com. Check that out. And there's a course on there that the user can take. And it'll teach you all these various different things. So for coaches, they'll find it very useful in terms of getting the prescription and understanding how they can manipulate the sessions appropriately. Same with the book. So the book is published by Human Kinetics. It's a bestseller, and that's on Amazon. So again, you can reach that through the HIIT Science website as well.
Put the links on everywhere. Yep.
And then otherwise, if you want to find out all the other different things that I'm doing, all my other different projects, I'm at paullaursen.com, and I'm an endurance coach to many of the top endurance athletes in the world, at least in the sport of Ironman triathlon, and a bunch of other different.
You're an amazing coach and at an amazing level at the top end of cutting edge science. I hope I can do that course in the course of the next year. I've got another couple of I've got to get through epigenetics training and a few other things, but I hope that I can get there, because this would help take our athletes definitely to the next level as well, and that would be very interesting for us. So thank you for all this information today. I think there's been some real gems of wisdom for our listeners that they can take away. And yeah, everybody, you've got to do your HIIT training no matter what sport you're in. There is an application for this. And if you want to find out more, if you want to dive deep into the research, get that book, The Science and Application of HIIT Training by Dr. Paul Laursen. And your colleague's name was Dr.
Martin Bucheit.
Michael Bucheit. So you can grab that. I'll put the links in the show notes. Any last words, Paul, for anyone out there, or anything that you would like to say as a last message to get across?
Well, my last message is that I miss you, New Zealand. Hello to all my friends and family back in New Zealand. We're a joint. We spent enough time in there that we're actually a joint citizenship family. So
wow.
we're we have our Kiwi heritage as well. And yeah,
Come
we'll
back.
definitely,
Come back.
we will be back one day. We love it there. And thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you so much, Dr. Paul.